Leaky fig, it's the leaky fig. We are doing stuff and making stuff, the leaky fig. Today on Quarantine Baking, we are going to be focusing on gluten-free desserts. So we're going to make some French macarons, which is a really great classic dessert that is really nice. I think a lot of people really enjoy them. They can be really beautiful. You guys can color them however you want. We're going to make some chocolate ganache to fill those. And if you have any jam or curd or anything else like that lying around that you want to use to fill them, you should feel free. I'm probably going to pipe a little bit of blackberry jam in the center of mine, and then do a ring of ganache to trap it in. But yeah, so we're going to make those today, and then while our macarons are drying, because that's a really vital step, we are going to make some vegan chocolate mousse, which is vegan and gluten-free. And it's a really beautiful, simple recipe and definitely still decadent and delicious. I think it's just generally healthier. There's no added sugar. So everything is, all of the sugar is either already in the chocolate that you're using, or it comes from the natural sweetness of dates, which is pretty great. So that one's going to come together really quickly, and then it just has to set in the fridge. But yeah, let's go ahead and dive into some macarons here. I have my stuff ready to go. I'm going to pop down to the recipe. Again, this is posted on the quarantine group page, so there's a PDF of it, and you're welcome to pull that. It is from Dominique Ansel, which he's a pretty famous baker. He's the guy who got famous for doing the crepe. So I did a little test run of this recipe, and I think it works great. I think that this is going to be a really good recipe for home bakers, because traditional French macarons require you to cook a hot sugar syrup to make the meringue, but these is just a classic meringue that you're just whipping the sugar into the egg white, and it's one less step. You still get a nice product, and you're not fussing with a very delicate hot sugar syrup. So yeah, I think this will be a great option for us. So I've got my setup here. I've got my egg whites, which have been sitting out there at room temperature. If yours aren't, they will still whip up fine. They might just take a little bit longer. Egg whites are happier and whip up better when they're at room temperature. And I've got granulated sugar, which is going to go with my egg whites. And then the powdered sugar is going to go with my almond meal here. I was talking to my friend Ryan, and just a point of clarification, I've always called this almond meal, but when you buy it in stores, it might be labeled as almond flour. And what you're looking for is to just make sure that it's blanched, so there's no skin on it. You can see it's all this beautiful pale color, which is definitely something you're going to want. And if you can't find this and you need to make your own, you can buy sliced blanched almonds in most grocery stores, and then just run it through a food processor until it's nice and fine. And that'll give you the exact same product. So no worries if you can't find this already ground somewhere. So yeah, we're gonna start by setting these guys aside, and I'm gonna grab my food processor here. And you'll see a lot of recipes tell you to sift together your almond meal or your almond flour and your powdered sugar. If you don't have a food processor, then absolutely do that. That's fine. I like to food process them together for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's going to take care of that sifting part for us. We don't have to struggle getting this ground almond through a fine mesh sieve, which will save a little bit of time. It's gonna mix everything together really nicely. But also it does grind it up even finer. And that's gonna give us a really beautiful, smooth texture on the macaron shell. So it's kind of a win-win situation there. And, oh, I dumped a little out on my counter. Okay. So I'm gonna pop this on to my food processor. And so I'm just gonna pulse this in here for, 20 seconds or so. Get it nice and combined and really, really fine. I hope that noise level was okay for everyone. I'm gonna scrape it a little bit just to get any of those pieces that were stuck down at the bottom well mixed in. Okay. And pulse a few more times. Great. So, too many pieces to this thing. So, as you can see, everything is really well combined. It looks really fine. This is going to be like a really beautiful texture for our macarons. So I'm going to take this and pour it into a bowl. Another note with macarons, this recipe is 4 ingredients. They're very simple, but they're very finicky, and it's easy to kind of have things go sideways on you. So one thing that's really important is that every surface that you're using, every bowl, every spatula, you want to make sure it's really clean. That's definitely going to help you yield the best result, clean and dry. So I'm transferring this stuff to a nice new bowl, and that looks great. Okay. So the next step for these guys is going to be to make our meringue. So you can do this with handheld egg beaters if you want. I'm going to pop it into my KitchenAid over here, which I think if I pop up here, you guys can see. This is actually a gift to me from a friend, Miss Karen Deal, and I love it. These are really handy if you don't have one already. I was really reticent about whether or not to get one before I became well acquainted with everything that they do. And whether it's a KitchenAid or a different brand or anything, having a stationary upright mixer like this can really come in handy. So I'm going to start whipping the egg whites completely by themselves. And the reason that I'm doing this is that sometimes if you dump the sugar in all at once and the egg whites haven't started to whip up yet, they just won't. The sugar will kind of suffocate them, and we need to activate those proteins a little bit. So what I'm going to do is whip it a little bit, let it get foamy, and then I'm going to add my sugar in a slow, steady stream to get it all incorporated. And then we're going to go to medium stiff peaks. So I'll show you what that looks like. So, let's see, pop down here. You can see it really didn't take long for those to start getting foamy. And at this point you can start adding in your sugar, right? Like we don't have peaks yet, they're foamy, those proteins are nice and activated, and we can start adding our sugar in a slow, steady stream. Okay, so we're getting really close to where we want to be with this meringue. Drop down here so you can see it. So it's nice and shiny. It's not quite stiff yet, so you can see we've still got some wiggle here. And when I pull this up, it kind of folds over on itself. So that's a medium soft peak, but I do have some sugar up on the sides of my bowl, so I'm going to scrape that back down into the meringue and make sure that that all gets incorporated, because that's going to be a vital part of the structure. And also, we don't want any grainy stuff getting into our macarons. We want it to be nice and smooth and all one texture. So I just scrape that in. Pop this back on. Good. So, what we have here is they're holding up together. They're kind of clumping, but they're still shiny and not dry. If you keep whipping them, the egg whites will actually dry out quite a bit. So, you want to make sure that you're still dealing with a fairly hydrated meringue. If you do happen to over whip them, don't panic. You can usually fold them a few times with a spatula and kind of get it back on track. But it's also egg whites. They're pretty inexpensive and easy to come by. So if you feel like it's not right, then go ahead and start over, because almond meal is actually a little bit more expensive. And again, these things are pretty finicky. So what I'm gonna do now is add my food color. And I'm gonna add that to the meringue. So I have these Chef Master or Americolor, I think they're the same thing, colors here. I think I'm gonna do purple for my blackberry. And these are gel colors, and you want to use, if you can, gel or powdered colors when you're making macarons, because it adds less moisture to the mix, which is important. We don't want to put too much hydration. We don't want to have too little. They have to be very balanced. But it's also a more concentrated color. If all you have are the liquid food colors, that's fine. Just be careful about how much you put in. You don't want to totally make your meringue really wet, and for it to lose all of its structure, you might just end up with kind of a fainter color on the finished product, which is fine. And I think that's going to be plenty. This is not very much meringue here, and I don't want it to be totally opaque. I want it to look a little more natural than that. And it will lighten up as it mixes with the almond meal a little bit too. All right, so this is the color I ended up with. It's a really nice kind of faint violet, which I think will be great. And I'm just gonna fold the white parts that are left over into the mix. I don't want to overmix my egg whites, so I'm just kind of gonna gently come in here, scrape the sides and up under the bottom, and fold it in a little bit. We're also going to fold this meringue into our almond meal mixture, so it will get more homogeneous and incorporated in that process. And you just want to be careful here because you don't want to deflate your meringue for the sake of color. So I'm just going to leave it there. So a lot of recipes, including this one, would then suggest that you pour all of your almond meal into your meringue. I will advise against that every time, and here's why. These are very sensitive to the amount of moisture that is in the meringue, that is in the almond meal, and that is in the environment. So if you live in a humid place, or you got a particularly moist batch of almond meal, or I keep mine in the freezer so that it doesn't go bad if I can't use it quickly enough. And sometimes when it comes back to room temperature, that will create some condensation or some more moisture in the mix. So I may not need all of this meringue. I know the recipe calls for this exact amount and everything, but just trust me, these macarons are so picky. You're much better off adding this in a couple of additions and then judging whether or not you actually need all of it a little later. So I'm going to start with, this is probably about half of what I made. You can start with a good amount. We know we're going to need most of it, or at least a good chunk of it. So, and this first amount is going to serve to hydrate our dry mix here. So I'm kind of just gently folding. You can expect to deflate this meringue a little bit in this process. That's okay. We're more looking to incorporate it into our almond meal and powdered sugar mixture. And it's going to form kind of a paste, and then we'll be a little more gentle with the following additions of meringue. Right now, I just want to get one homogeneous mix in here. Okay, you can see even that amount has made this almond mixture fully hydrated. You know, there aren't any dry bits. So at this point, all I'm looking for is the right texture of my batter. And I think that we're gonna get there fairly quickly. You can see that there's some shine happening in here, which means that there's quite a bit of moisture. So, but it's definitely still shaggy, still looks like a really thick batter, more like a dough than a batter right now. And we do want it to be a batter eventually. So I'm gonna grab my meringue here and do another scoop about this size, maybe a little bit more. This is the tricky part of making these guys, because you're looking to get the right ratio of meringue to almond meal. You can't mix it too much or they will separate on you in the baking process or break. But at the same time, we need to get the right texture and the right amount of meringue incorporated. So I'm just being very gentle, trying to go around the edges and come up through the middle as I'm folding. And I'm just keeping an eye on stuff as it looks like it's starting to become a little soupier. I'm gonna let it rest and see what it does. So it will kind of settle into itself. And as these streaks start to disappear, that's giving me information about how ready the mix is. And this is settling into itself, but it's taking a little bit longer than it should. So I'm gonna add a little bit more meringue. But I for sure don't think I'm gonna use all of this. So it's good that we held back. I think that should be plenty. You can see even in that time that I scooped it out, how much those streaks have already smoothed out and it's settled into itself. I think that's gonna do it. Yeah, it's just really important that you're gentle with this process, that you take your time and that you focus on not overworking the batter, because it will come back to bite you if you do. If you try to rush it or skip steps, she is a vengeful product, the macaron. So here you can see it's kind of slowly spreading out, settling into itself a little bit more. And if I take my spatula and pick up a bit, I can kind of form a figure eight here. It's running off, and I'm not getting a full figure eight as I go around, but I think 2 or 3 more folds will get me there. And that's kind of a key thing to look for in the readiness of your batter. Once you hit that figure eight, stop folding and scoop it into your bag. All right, and we're there. We got it. So this is how much meringue I had left over. It's not a lot, but it is enough to make the entire mix way too wet. So yeah, that's again why every single time I will advise against dumping all of your dry into your meringue, because I can't count how many times I haven't needed all of it. I almost never use all of it, actually. So that's gonna go there. And now we're ready to pipe. So I've got my sheet tray here. This is an aluminum pan. I bought it at Cash and Carry, or one of these restaurant supply stores carry these. It's very cheap. I think this pan was probably about $4. It doesn't have any non-stick or anything on it. It's just an aluminum pan. It's sturdy, it's hardy, it's what we use in the industry, and I think that it's got a very good like thickness to it for this type of baking. And on top of that, I've got a silicone mat. If you don't have one of these Silpats, that's fine. You can use parchment. If your oven runs a little hot or you're not sure, you might want to double pan if you're working with a thinner sheet tray, just because the bottom of the macaron might get a little too cooked before the rest of it is done, and sometimes that will cause some problems with the feet coming out too far or something like that. That being said, I have used parchment to make macarons many times. Sometimes it even works better than Silpats. It really just depends on your oven, on your pans, and a little bit on your macaron mix. So this is the one I'm going to use. I've got my piping bag here. These, I know that you can buy the like the cloth ones or reusable ones. I actually do reuse these, even though they're classified as disposable, if I'm working with like ingredients. So for instance, this has nuts in it. I'm not going to use it with something where that would, where I was dealing with a nut allergy or a nut-free product. If I had gluten in here from piping profiteroles or eclairs, then I wouldn't use it with a gluten-free product after that. But you can wash them and use them a couple of times. And the tip I've gotten here is a round tip. It's probably about a 1/2 inch tip. And I think it's just a Wilton tip. If you don't have a tip like this, that's fine. You can just cut your hole in the bag to that size. I would start more conservatively than you might think you need to, and then keep cutting larger just to be safe. You definitely don't want too big of a hole for this. The batter will come rushing out. And then to fill my bag, I'm just going to tuck in the bag into the tip so that as I'm filling, there's a seal and the batter won't run out. Okay, so I think this will be a really nice springy purple color, go well with a chocolate and blackberry filling. So I'm showing you a very basic macaron example, but you guys can get creative with it. You can put citrus zest into your batter. You can put extracts, although again, just be aware of the moisture content that might add. You can put tea, Earl Grey or black tea, green tea, lavender. You can add seeds to the top or into the mix if you want. Or even like instant espresso powder, things like that. I will say it's hard, it can be hard to infuse a lot of flavor into the shell itself. Most of the flavor comes from the filling. There's just such a high ratio of sugar in the shell that most of the time that's going to be the dominant flavor note. But it can be done. And yeah, you can use different nuts too. You can use pistachio, hazelnut. I usually recommend doing at least 50% of the almond flour. And then, you know, you could do 50% hazelnut or pistachio. I've never tried it with macadamia or peanuts or anything like that, but so long as the fat content isn't too high so that you can't get a good floury texture when you grind it, it should work okay. So when I'm piping, first of all, this is my bag, and I've squeezed everything down here so it's nice and taut, and then I'm wrapping the excess around my thumb here, which is giving me a really good grip, and just twisting so that my batter is right up at the tip there, and I've got good pressure. My left hand, I'm right-handed, so I'm holding the bag in my right hand. My left hand is going to be my guide, and my right hand is what I'm going to use to actually squeeze and put pressure. And when I'm piping these, I want to be directly up and down perpendicular to the tray. I'm going to be up somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch above the surface of the tray, and I'm not going to move my tip at all. I'm not piping around circle or anything. I'm just placing it. I'm going to apply gentle pressure so that it comes out very evenly, and then I'm going to swipe to clean it and lift up. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm just above the tray. These are going to spread quite a bit, so pipe smaller than what you want the actual cookie to be. This is probably going to spread quite a bit. But I've got a nice even circle here, and then I don't know if you can see this little tip sticking up. That's fine. We're going to tap the tray, and if that doesn't just automatically reabsorb, it will when we tap the tray and get rid of any excess bubbles. Now when I pipe, I want to leave a fair amount of space, knowing that these are going to spread a little bit, and that I also want them to cook evenly. So I'm going to go here, and I'm just applying a little bit of pressure. You can see my tip stays in the exact same place. The batter just comes out from it. And then I'm just I stop squeezing and I swipe to release it. If you just pipe straight up and down and then come straight up, you're gonna get a little kiss like that. This is a wet enough batter where that will probably reabsorb too when we tap it down. But if you can practice the technique of just doing this little swipe, you're going to end up with the smoother surface on your shell. Now you can probably see that in addition to leaving quite a bit of space, I'm also offsetting my rows. And that's for the same reason. These guys are going to spread, and I want to leave them plenty of room to do that. As you get down towards the end of your bag, it might be a little more difficult to pipe evenly. Just do your best. You know, I like to come up and keep pressing all of the batter down towards the end. You can go a little slower. You might run into a couple of air bubbles, so just be prepared for that. It's not the end of the world. Okay, and then with this last little bit of batter here, just right in the end of my tip, I'm kind of gonna pipe a mini one, and this is gonna be our tester to check the skin. And I'll show you what I mean after these rest. But first, I'm gonna go ahead and mute this while I tap this down, because I am gonna tap it pretty hard. And hopefully you can see about how hard I'm tapping it, but I also don't wanna blow out your eardrums, so. Okay, so I don't know if you can see, but I had quite a few little air bubbles that came up and popped, which is good. We don't want those in our shells. So this batter will resettle now that we've tapped it down. And this also has given us a view of the actual size that these are gonna be. So you know, this was the little tiny guy that I piped, and he's actually grown quite a bit in that tapping process. So they shouldn't come out further, they should only go up at this point. So we're gonna put these over by the oven and probably let them dry for about 30 minutes. I'm gonna check them. And because it's 30 minutes before I think I'm gonna bake them, I'm also gonna turn my oven on and preheat it to 325 degrees. Okay, great. So that is most of the work done on those. Now, let's go ahead and make some chocolate ganache. So let me just pop down to, oh, I don't think I actually put the recipe on here. It's very simple. Ganache is typically a ratio. So I'm using 4 ounces of dark chocolate here. And these are just those, you know, mid-range baking chips as well. You want to make sure that it's pretty small. So if you've got a big bar, go ahead and chop it pretty fine. And if you don't have, if you just have little chocolate chips, that size should be okay. And then in my pot, I have 3 ounces of heavy cream. And so I'm going to slowly bring this up to a simmer, not a boil, because it will foam and boil over and make a huge mess. Trust me, I've done it enough for all of the rest of you to never have to do it yourselves, hopefully. So I'm just gonna put this on kind of a medium-low heat, bring it up to a simmer. We're gonna pour it into the chocolate, let it combine, let it melt. If it doesn't all get melted, we can pop it on a double boiler to finish melting it and then pour it out to cool. It's as simple as that. I'm going to set a timer to check that. And wash my spatula here so I can use it on the next project. So the next project is also going to be pretty straightforward, pretty quick and easy. We're going to make some vegan chocolate mousse. One thing I forgot to mention in the recipe itself is that if you want this to be truly vegan chocolate mousse, make sure you're reading the ingredients on the chocolate that you're using. There are a lot of chocolates that have lecithin added to them, and that can come from plant-based. That could be like soy lecithin, or it could come from dairy products. And of course, milk chocolate is going to have dairy in it. I wouldn't recommend making this recipe with white chocolate just because there are no actual cocoa solids in white chocolate. It's only cocoa butter. I'm not sure how well it would set up. I'm going to use just the same dark chocolate that I'm using for my ganache and that I used in the bakes last week for the coconut macarons. And in fact, I saved my chocolate that I dipped the coconut macarons in, strained out the coconut, and am now using it to make this mousse. So what I have here is my chocolate. I've got my dates, and I cut each date into about 6 or 8 pieces, just so that it doesn't totally blow out my blender. If you have a really powerful blender, you only want to cut it once or twice, go for it. I have a really dinky little blender right now, and I think it's probably gonna struggle through this recipe no matter what I do. But I'm gonna start by taking my chocolate in a heat-proof bowl and throwing it on a double boiler on low heat. And while I do that, I will put the recipe up just so you can get a refresher. And I'm using a cashew almond blend for the milk on this mousse recipe. I like cashew milk. It tends to have a little higher fat content, so it's a little richer, will lend to a nice texture. But if all you can find is almond or soy or even coconut, any of those should work with this. So, you know, just whatever your preference is. I have not tried this recipe with non-dairy creamers. I don't know if you've seen those by the other milks and stuff, but they're meant for coffee. And those are probably a little richer, heartier products as well. So that might be worth trying and seeing how it works, if that's what you have on hand. Okay, another couple minutes on our ganache. And to cool the ganache, I'm going to grab a nice clean rimmed sheet tray here. And by spreading it out on this surface, I have more surface area that's exposed to the cool air, and it will cool down to a more pipeable temperature much quicker. Because it's going to be pretty liquidy when it comes out, and we won't be able to pipe it onto the macarons. You can make the ganache first before you make the macarons. You can make it the night before and just let it chill on the counter. You can put it in the fridge, but know that it will be too stiff to pipe if you let it get too cold. So you just kind of want to hit that very nice, smooth, sweet spot with it. So I'm going to do that by pouring it out onto this sheet tray as soon as it's done. And it's getting pretty close to simmering over here. when you see your cream start to steam a little bit, that means that the excess water is rushing out of it and you're coming up very close to a simmer and a boil at that point. So when you see steam happening, keep an eye on it. Almost there. So close. All right. So this will probably make more chocolate ganache than we actually need to fill the amount of macarons that we made. That is not a problem. If you like chocolate, then you can basically just eat this by the spoonful. And you can also spoon it out and make truffles by rolling it in some cocoa powder. So I've got my hot cream here and I'm just pouring it into my chocolate. Okay. And I'm gonna let this rest for just a little bit to kind of start that melting process before I start working it. And usually if you're making large batches of ganache, you don't need to whisk it. There's generally enough heat coming from the hot cream to melt your chocolate so long as it's chopped fine enough. But because this is such a small batch and it's going to cool more rapidly as I'm mixing it together, I am going to whisk it just to kind of help break up and incorporate those pieces a little bit more. So I'm just starting at the center here. And you can see as I go along, it's pulling that cream into the chocolate, smoothing out, getting nice and shiny. And I'm just giving it a few extra spins here to make sure that I don't have any chunks. I want a nice smooth ganache, but you can always remelt it down over a double boiler or even in the microwave. And sometimes when you melt it back down, it wants to break on you. It'll kind of separate out the fat a little bit. That's fine. You can usually save that very easily by just adding some cold cream to the mixture and incorporating that, and it'll reconstitute. So I'm going to take this and pour it into my sheet tray that I have ready. Keeping an eye on my other double boiler that I've got going over there. Okay. And different chocolates and different creams will have different fat contents. So if you have a mix for ganache that works well for you, by all means use it. And If you have a type of chocolate that you really love that you want to use and it's not working well with my recipe, a lot of times you can go online to their website, just tapping out the air bubbles, and they'll tell you a ganache recipe that works great with their chocolate too. But they're all pretty much cream and chocolate. So pretty straightforward, easy stuff there. This will keep in a sealed container on the counter for a couple of days. If you are planning on using it, piping with it, you need it to be spreadable. It'll keep for a couple of days on the counter. Otherwise, you can refrigerate it for at least a couple of weeks. It should last no problem. Okay. I'm gonna come over here and give my other chocolate a stir. Careful when you're using double boilers too. They might heat up the edge of your bowl, but also if there's steam escaping from the pot, that can definitely come out, hit your hand, and burn you. So as someone who has done that many times, just be careful. I like to use a towel or a pot holder to stabilize my bowl when I'm stirring it over a double boiler to protect against that very thing. So my chocolate is just about totally melted here. I think the residual heat will be enough to melt it all the way down. So we can move on to the next step of this chocolate mousse. All right. So this dinky little thing is my blender. It's basically supposed to be for smoothies. My roommate has a nicer blender, but she took it with her to her quarantine abode, so I'm stuck with this. But we're gonna make it work. Again, if all you have is a food processor, I think that you can make this work. The texture might not be quite as fine, but if you soak the dates in your non-dairy milk and soften them a little bit, I think that that will help with the processor being able to kind of get a more homogeneous texture and not buck around too much on you. That's the problem when this creates kind of a conical tornado, but the food processors are just swirling everything around and it can cause them to rock back and forth and go a little crazy. So then over here I have my milk. I'm just gonna pour that in and it'll just fit, which is great. Okay, I'm gonna pop it on the blender. if you look here, you can see there are still some like speckles from the skin of the dates. Unless you have a really fantastic blender, and honestly, we have nice ones at work, you're not really gonna get rid of that. That's okay. This is actually fine enough. It's gonna be pretty much melt in the mouth. It's not gonna mess with your texture. But I do usually still just run it through, not a super fine mesh sieve, because I don't wanna lose the structural components in here, but just kind of almost a sifter type sieve. And that'll catch any stray big chunks that may be stuck in there. So at this point, all you have to do is add your melted chocolate to your blender and mix it all together. And then you pour it into your vessels and you let it cool. I don't know if all of my chocolate is gonna fit in here. I might have to do it in a couple batches, but that's okay. I'm gonna make it work. Okay, I'm gonna put this back on the blender and get that incorporated. Kind of looks like a chocolate milkshake now. Can't even really see any of those date bits, but I'm gonna pour some of this off so I can incorporate the rest of my chocolate. I don't know if you saw that texture, but it's already looking a lot thicker than you might expect. It's kind of a funky little recipe, but basically what's happening is you've got the fats in the non-dairy milk that you're using. You have the cocoa mass and the fat that comes with the chocolate. And then you have the meat of the dates. And all of those work together to give this mousse structure, so that you're not having to use eggs or gelatin or whipped cream or you know, a lot of vegan recipes also use avocado or tofu, and I think that you can get some really nice products with those for sure. This one is just a more simplified, and then a little lower sugar, lower fat version, but it does taste really nice. It's just sweet enough. It's definitely chocolatey. Dates and chocolate work really well together. You can't really taste the dates themselves, but those are nice complementary flavors. And then the chocolate is generally, especially if you're using a dark chocolate, is generally powerful enough to overcome any like nuttiness or underlying flavors from your non-dairy milk. I think that's going to be good to go. I'm going to add this into my bowl here so it's all incorporated together. And then you can pour this into whatever vessel you want. I would recommend pouring it into single serving vessels. So if you want to use a ramekin, if you want to use, you know, a wine glass or a small bowl, I would just avoid putting it into a larger bowl and then scooping from it, because it doesn't have so much structure that it can tolerate too much jostling and unrefrigerating and then refrigerating and all of that without becoming a little bit soupy. So it'll still taste good, but you'll lose that nice, beautiful, moussey texture. So then I'm just going to pour this in here, run it through my sieve, catch any big chunks. If you do use a food processor, I would definitely recommend straining it, just because you're more likely to get some bigger chunkies doing it that way than with a blender. And that's pretty good. There's just a couple little pieces of skin here from the dates that didn't get totally blended in. So it's good that we caught those. You know, they're not going to ruin it or anything. This will just give us a really nice, beautiful texture. So the only part that's left is to put the mousse in the vessels. And I have these kind of cool glasses here that my brother brought. So I'm going to use these. I think that these are nice kind of like dessert glasses. And I don't know if you can see as I'm pouring, but it's quite thick actually, even now, and it hasn't set at all. So this will be something that you can eat with a spoon. It sits up on the spoon, and will have like a really nice melt in the mouth texture to it. Just need a couple more glasses here. And then these just need to sit in the fridge for at least 4 hours. I would recommend overnight to be safe. But if you can't wait, I can't blame you. So it makes a pretty good amount here too. So if you're having a post-quarantine small little get-together, or if you just want to have dessert every day after dinner, this will set you up for the week, I think. All right, and that is the vegan chocolate mousse. Once these are set up, I'll go ahead and post a photo of what it looks like to spoon it out and watch me eat it. Tastes great. macarons. I think that they are getting very close to being ready to bake. So I'm just gonna stick these in the fridge. This mousse is really great topped with some whipped coconut cream if you want to keep it vegan, or classic whipped cream. Fresh berries will make it really gorgeous. You can do some nuts, some toasted nuts or candied nuts on top would also be really great. Whatever is to your taste. Okay, so let's take a look at these guys. What you're looking for in readiness to bake on your macarons is that they have a nice skin. So I don't know if you saw, but it was quite a wet batter. So if I were to stick my finger in them right after I piped, I'd be pulling off batter. It would stick to my finger. I'd make a big mess of things. I have done that. I don't know why, but I did. But we want a skin so you can basically like lightly rub your finger over it. They should still feel soft. You don't want it to be super thick. You don't want it to be really brittle. You don't want it to just like crack under the pressure of your finger. But if it hasn't developed a skin, then when you put these in the oven, the filling inside the shell is going to burst out the top of it, and you're going to be really disappointed because you just poured your whole heart into these little shells, and you're so ready for them to come out beautiful and have perfect little feet and be ready to be filled and decorated beautifully, and then they're just going to explode everywhere. So definitely make sure that you are waiting to put them in the oven until they have that skin. I think that these guys are ready to go. They feel pretty good to me. Yeah, they should feel like, maybe not your forearm, but maybe more like your slack skin here. If you just touch it gently. And yeah, I think that this is the trickiest part, in my opinion. I might let it go another 5 minutes, just to be safe. It's not gonna hurt them to let them go another 5 minutes, but it could help. All right, I am going to bite the bullet, pop these macarons in. I did make this recipe yesterday. It came out great. So knock on counter. We can do it again on camera this time. So my macarons are going in on a middle rack. I would recommend middle to lower part of your oven. We don't want them to get any color on the top. We want them to be cooked and, not raw in the center, although we do still want them to be chewy. But we're not trying to put color. Most cookies, you want that nice caramelization, you want those golden browns. That's not what we're going for here. Abandon all notions of that for this exercise. For this exercise, what we're looking for is the feet of the macaron, which, if you're familiar with them at all, should be something that you've heard before, I think. I'll go ahead and show you a couple of the ones that I made yesterday so I can demonstrate and fill this time. So I made kind of some egg-shaped ones for little robin's egg blue. I don't know, I guess I'm still in an Easter mindset here. And this is just some cocoa powder that I very lightly dusted on top as soon as I piped them to give it some speckles. It's a really easy trick. Feel free to try it. You do have to pipe a little bit differently. I tried to record myself doing it. If I can make that video make sense, I'll put it out for folks. But let's review the anatomy of a macaron. So this is our outer shell here. And again, I had to let them form a skin before I baked them. Otherwise, this would have just split wide open. And then this part on the side are the feet, which did not exist when we were piping them. But this is basically as the batter heats up and this shell is stable and not moving or growing, the batter is coming out and steam is evaporating and it's pressing the whole shell up and then forming these feet at the bottom. And then I have the underside of the shell, which is nice and cooked, but you can see I also don't have too much color there. Sometimes you get a little bit more color on the bottom, just if you need to leave it in a little longer to settle it. But if your mix was good and you're working with clean surfaces, you know, you've got clean silicone mats or fresh parchment, they should come off just like this. You shouldn't have to scrape them off or peel them off. You definitely don't want to spray your pan or anything like that. They should just peel off very easily and have a nice clean surface here that's really smooth. So that's what we're looking for. These came out pretty good. I think that my feet are a little bit tall, but you know, some people like that. Honestly, the macaron has evolved so much over the last 5 years, even as they've become really popular, that I think people like different things. And you know, French purists will have one thing in mind, and then people who have macaron shops on every street corner will have something totally different in mind. And at the end of the day, it's a cookie. So it's got to be what you want it to be and something that you like. So yeah, but they're great. They're versatile. You can do a lot of stuff with them. I personally find them to be a little bit sweet for my palate. So a lot of times to temper that, I will incorporate ingredients like tea, like floral aromatics, so rose or elderflower, orange water, things that are a little more almost bitter to temper some of the sweetness. You can also cut that sweetness by incorporating some sharpness with like lemon curd, lemon zest, citrus. That acid will help cut through some of the sweetness. A lot of times, you know, lemon curd is also sweetened and everything, but it is nice and bright. So if you have a dot of that in your filling, then you can have like a nice kind of balance to the sweetness and the sharpness, and then all of the textural elements that come along with this. So, macarons. Again, my oven is at 325. These, usually the magic number for baking macarons is 13 minutes. Again, different ovens, different elevations, humidities, batter mixes, sheet trays, all of that is going to affect it. So if there's one thing I can impart to you today, if your macarons don't turn out, please do not be like disheartened and throw your hands up. They are finicky. They're very simple, but complex at the same time in the fact that you have to account for all of the different variables. And the first time you make them, you don't know what you're looking for, and you don't know how they're going to do in your oven or, you know, like your environment. So don't be discouraged. This is a thing that happens all the time. And every time I move to a new job and I'm making macarons in different ovens. You know, we're getting ingredients from different purveyors. Things aren't the same brand, even batches of ingredients, batches of flour, batches of almond meal, all of that stuff is different. So, you know, you have to adjust. And it usually takes me a couple of batches to figure out what needs to be done. And I've actually used different recipes entirely too, you know, because I've just not been able to be successful with one. So I pivot, I do some research, and I find another one that works for me. They're just one of those products that, you know, they kind of have a stick up their butt. They're French. What do you expect? No offense, but I mean, it's true. So, okay. So, we are 7 minutes in, and I am going to rotate these. I'm going to be very gentle as I do this. I don't want to bang my tray around or do anything like that. I just want to like very gently rotate it so that I'm getting even cooking. And I have to say they are looking quite lovely. This is one of those things similar to a cake. You don't want to let your oven sit open. You don't want to let all of the heat escape. You want to try and keep the environment in there as close to the same as you can. But I do find that a rotation is really important, so it's worth opening the oven door to get that done, but just do it as quickly and as smoothly as you can. And hopefully you won't have any disasters. We've got probably 2 to 3 to 4 minutes left on these guys. I'm going to check them in about 1 minute. And if they're close, I will show you what it is that you need to look for. We're kind of looking for a very specific wiggle when we touch them. They should feel pretty firm, pretty solid, like they have good structure, like it's baked, but it shouldn't be so dried out that it has no give. We want like a nice even, just if we gently press with our fingers, a nice little wiggle to it. Kind of similar to what you look for in custards, I guess, as you're baking custards. You don't want it to slosh, but you also don't want it to be completely solid because, you know, it's just going to be overcooked at that point. You want to have a nice little jiggle in the center and an even sway to it. We're looking for a good groove in our custards and in our macaron shells. So let's take a peek. Okay. So these are our buddies here. Oh, can't get the angle right. I've gotten just a little bit of color on the top. You know, my oven might be a little bit hot, but they've got just a little bit of give here. So I'm gonna pull these out. I think that they're totally done. That was only 11 minutes, which was plenty for this batch. So, you know, maybe my oven is running a little hot today. Again, we're constantly playing defense when we're baking anyways, but especially with macarons, we are always on defense. But, you know, they do have nice feet. Oh, it's because I'm trying to point at the wrong camera. They do have nice feet. They have a nice smooth shell. I think that they look pretty good overall. So now they cool. Shut my oven off. And yeah, I think that that's probably a good place for us to leave it today. Once they're totally cooled, I will record a video of filling them and pairing them up and pressing them together. This particular recipe recommends storing them in the fridge for 24 hours before eating them. And that's so, again, the opposite of what you typically think of with a baked pastry item like this. But it does make some amount of sense for the macarons. It's not something that I do all the time, but because we want that nice chewy texture to them, when you put them in the fridge, that condensation and the humidity change that's in the fridge will help add that chewiness to the texture of the shell itself. You don't have to wait 24 hours in the fridge though. Like, you can eat them if you want to. I will say, if you think that they're a little overbaked and they're crunchy instead of chewy, pop them in the fridge. It will definitely help with that, especially once you fill them and they can absorb some of the moisture from your filling. And if you throw them in the fridge overnight, that will definitely help get you back to a chewy, more pleasant texture like you're looking for. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me again on this crazy, crazy adventure through quarantine. And I'll be back tomorrow with some sourdough bread and some sticky buns. So we're gonna be set up for bread for the week and some breakfasty delights. And yeah, keep sending in photos, keep sending in questions and comments. It's so great to see you guys engaged in this. It's really exciting for me, and feels really great to be doing this with you. So yeah, if you have any questions, comments, suggestions, something you're dying to make, please let me know and we will get it done to the best of my ability. All right, I'm out. Hey guys, I am back and the macarons are cool. Our ganache is set and pipeable. So I'm gonna do a quick demo on how to fill them. This is really simple stuff. You don't have to even follow these steps exactly. You're welcome to just use a spoon, scoop a little on, and smush it together. It's a sandwich cookie. So this is just if you want it to be a little bit more picture perfect. Here's how you do it. So I'm gonna cut down here. And first I thought I would demonstrate rolling a chocolate cone or a little piping bag. I have a little rectangle of parchment paper right here. This has been cut down from a larger piece, but you know, if you start with a larger piece, that's fine. You can fold it in half a couple times and cut it down, or you can start with a larger piece, but I'm gonna I have my length here, and I'm taking the bottom corner and putting it up and making the shape of two mountain peaks. And then I'm gonna crease that. Okay, and take a knife and cut along that crease. Try and get it as straight and as even as you can. You know, careful not to cut yourself, but as much as you can avoid creating a fold, it will help you. And so you have the makings of two cones here. And then to roll the cone, you have a blunt end and a pointy end. So you're going to take the blunt end, roll it around so that it's on the other side of your peak. So you still have two peaks. This is your blunt peak. And from there, you just continue rolling around until you get to the top, and then you just kind of pull this end, this pointy end, up tight. Pull it as tight as you can. If you touch the tip, it should poke. I mean, it should feel sharp. And then I'm folding this over the lip of the cone, and it'll just stay like that. So should probably actually tighten that a little bit. There we go. Okay, so I'll demonstrate again on this other piece. I have my blunt end and my pointy end. I'm lifting my blunt end, and kind of in the center, I'm rolling it around. So I've basically done a 180-degree conical roll here so that the tip is pointing the same direction up. And I'm just gonna follow that around with the pointy end until I get to this point where I'm running out and I'm pulling it taut. And if you feel like your tip isn't as pointy as it should be, you know, you can just kind of straighten it out, shift the paper as you need to make that happen. And then you take this excess tip and fold it over the cone. And then we'll just cut the tip of the cone to the size that we want, and you can use it to write in chocolate writing, to pipe on cakes or with ganache. We're gonna use it to pipe into macarons here. So, yeah. Here are the macarons. And the first step is to loosen them all up, which I have. They all came loose very easily. And then you want to pair them right now. The reason why we don't just flip over every other one to fill it is because you want them to be as close to the same size, and because I'm not using a guide when I pipe them, you know, they're slightly different sizes. So I'm going to match them up like this, and when I find a pair, set it aside. See, like, this one is, I've got some edge here, so it's a little too big for this bottom one, but this one is a much better fit. So that way you just end up with more even little buddies hanging out together, and they'll look a lot cleaner and more like what you would see in a shop. Okay. Okay, and I've got one extra one here. That's okay. It's a little small anyways. So I'm gonna leave one side of my pears facing up, and then one side where I'm actually gonna put the filling, so I know to just reach over and cap it. Just like this. So I wanna do blackberry and chocolate in mine. I have a little bit of blackberry jam here that I'm gonna fill up my cone with, and then I have a piping bag for my chocolate ganache. And right now I just have the same size tip in here. It's probably easier to use a smaller one. I'm just kind of gonna carefully pipe this, but if you do have a slightly smaller tip, for this method where I'm doing a ring and then a center filling, it's easier to use a smaller tip. Otherwise, this size tip is great if you just want to fill the whole thing with chocolate ganache. So, got my bag. This is our ganache, and you can see it's a really nice, smooth consistency. It's coming up off the pan really easily. I think this is going to pipe really well for us. And I'm not even going to use it all because I don't think we're going to need it all. for easy piping, if this is my bag, I've pushed all of the filling down towards the tip. I'm going to grip the bag with my strong hand, so I'm right-handed. And then I'm going to fold the excess bag around my thumb, which gives me a really good tight grip. And then all you have to do is twist the bag to tighten it so that you have some nice pressure. And then to fill these, I'm just gonna go around. You don't wanna go right up to the edge because we want to be able to press a little bit. So I'm leaving just a little rim around the edge as I'm filling these up. Like so. And then if you wanted to fill a whole one that was just ganache on the inside, the best way to do that is pipe it almost like you're piping the shell of the macaron. So you're perpendicular and you're not moving your tip and you just pipe straight up and down. It'll spread out evenly in all directions. And then when you go to press it together, you hold it so that you're coming at equal pressure. You can kind of see if there's like a part that's a little uneven and move it around, and then you're just gonna gently press it together. I recommend pressing from the edges of the macaron to get the most even press and also so that you don't break the top of the shell. And then we have a nice chocolate macaron right here. So you can see I'm piping a ring into these guys. And the reason for that is that I'm gonna take my cone, fill it with a little bit of blackberry jam. Make sure you don't fill these cones too full. You wanna leave quite a bit of space because the way that we seal them is to kind of pinch it closed, fold that mountain peak over, and then you wanna roll away from your seam. So this is where my seam is. I'm rolling away and that's gonna pull it tighter. So now I have a little piping bag situation. And if you fill it too full, it's definitely gonna splooge out through the sides, kind of make your life miserable, which is not why we're here. And then I'm just going to clip it. You know, I'm filling a pretty large area here, so I'm gonna clip it pretty far back. Give myself a decent sized opening there. And then pipe in some jam. Now with the size of these macarons, it would also be pretty easy to just use a spoon and kind of scrape it into the center. If you don't want to fuss with a piping bag, totally fine. And then the process for sandwiching them is exactly the same. I'm gonna kind of hold them up and press them together, trying to get it as even as I can. And then I have a nice, beautiful, even macaron. And that's pretty much how you do it, guys. Yeah, I hope that this recipe works well for you. If you have any questions or specific issues that came up, let me know. I'm happy to help you troubleshoot anything that went sideways. It happens a lot with these, so again, don't be discouraged. It happens all the time. But I hope that this was helpful and fun, and I'll see you at the next one.